Tonight, you're listening to Nighttime Knowledge, a quiet place for calm explanations of how the world works. This is not a news update. There's no urgency here. You don't need to watch. There's nothing on the screen you'll miss. Just listen. Small country, large influence. Denmark is often described as a small country. On most maps, it appears modest in scale, a narrow peninsula extending north from continental Europe, a collection of islands between two seas, a population small enough to disappear among the world's largest cities. At first glance, nothing about this suggests global importance. There are countries with larger economies, countries with larger populations, countries with far greater military capacity. And yet Denmark appears regularly in international cooperation, in diplomatic forums, in educational exchange, in long-term international projects that extend far beyond Northern Europe. This raises a quiet question. How does a small country continue to matter in a world shaped by size, power, and scale? To answer that, it helps to let go of the assumption that influence is something that can be measured directly. Influence is not always loud. It does not always announce itself. In many cases, influence emerges slowly, through behavior rather than strength, through consistency rather than pressure. Some countries shape outcomes by commanding attention. Others shape systems by remaining present. Denmark belongs to the second category. Its role is rarely dramatic, rarely decisive in a single moment, but often important over time. This episode explores how influence can grow from reliability, diplomacy, culture, and long-term engagement rather than size alone. There is no argument to win here, no position to defend, only an explanation of how a small country can quietly remain relevant in global systems designed for much larger players. Geography as quiet advantage. Geography does not create power by itself, but it shapes opportunity. Denmark sits between systems, between Northern Europe and the North Atlantic, between continental economies and maritime routes, between land-based infrastructure and sea-based logistics. This position does not make Denmark dominant, but it makes it connected. Connection matters in global systems. Trade routes pass nearby. Shipping lanes converge. Energy networks intersect. Being located where systems meet allows participation without control, observation without ownership, coordination without command. Over time, this has shaped how Denmark engages internationally. Rather than competing for dominance, it focuses on integration. Rather than directing outcomes, it supports alignment. Geography also encourages outward orientation. A country surrounded by water cannot isolate itself easily. It must cooperate. Ports become gateways. Movement becomes normal. Exchange becomes routine. This produces familiarity with cross-border systems, legal frameworks, logistical standards, shared rules. Geography, in this sense, trains behavior. It encourages coordination over isolation, adaptation over resistance. Denmark's location has quietly reinforced this approach for centuries, not as a strategy chosen once, but as a pattern repeated over time. Geography does not explain everything, but it helps explain why Denmark is comfortable operating between systems rather than inside a single one. Diplomacy as maintenance. For small states, diplomacy scales better than force. Force depends on resources. Diplomacy depends on attention. Diplomacy does not require size. It requires patience, preparation, and the ability to remain engaged long after attention has moved elsewhere. In practice, diplomacy is rarely dramatic. It happens in meetings that never make headlines, in working groups, in committees, in carefully drafted statements where clarity matters more than impact. This kind of work can appear slow, even unremarkable, but over time, it performs a vital function. Diplomacy acts as maintenance. It keeps systems aligned. It reduces friction. It prevents small disagreements from becoming structural problems. For Denmark, this approach is not a limitation. It is an advantage. When power is limited, listening becomes valuable. When force is unavailable, coordination becomes essential. Other countries learn what to expect. Language remains measured. Positions evolve gradually. Surprises are minimized. This creates trust, not emotional trust, operational trust, the confidence that agreements will be respected, that commitments will endure, that processes will continue even when political conditions change. Diplomacy, in this form, is not about winning. It is about keeping systems functional, and systems reward reliability, reputation, and predictability. Reputation is not built through statements. It is built through repetition, doing the same thing, in the same way, over long periods of time. Denmark is widely perceived as predictable. Agreements are honored. Commitments are maintained even when circumstances change. Positions evolve slowly, rather than shifting abruptly. This may sound unremarkable, but in international politics, predictability is valuable. When negotiations are complex, partners look for stability. When uncertainty is high, they look for consistency. Predictability reduces risk. It allows planning, coordination, long-term cooperation. This reputation did not appear suddenly. It developed across decades of participation in international institutions, across thousands of small decisions handled without escalation, across a political culture that prioritized process over performance. Reputation functions like infrastructure. It is invisible when it works, but costly when it fails. Once established, it compounds. Each predictable action reinforces the next. Over time, reputation becomes a form of influence, not because it forces outcomes, but because it shapes expectations, and expectations guide behavior. Culture, trust, and low hierarchy. Culture shapes behavior long before policy does. In Danish society, social trust plays a central role. Trust reduces friction in everyday life. It allows decisions to be made with fewer safeguards, with responsibility distributed broadly. Hierarchies tend to be flat. Titles matter less than contribution. Managers are accessible. Disagreement is permitted. Consensus is often preferred over clear winners and losers. These patterns shape how organizations function and how political decisions are made. Policies are discussed, adjusted, revisited. Compromise is not framed as weakness, but as progress. This cultural approach extends into diplomacy. Negotiation feels familiar. Listening is expected. Abrupt shifts are rare. From the outside, this can appear slow, even indecisive, but over time, it creates predictability, and predictability lowers risk. In international relations, this matters. Countries that behave consistently are easier to work with, easier to plan around, easier to trust. Culture, in this sense, becomes structure, not written into law, but embedded in behavior. Education as long-term diplomacy. Education is rarely discussed as a tool of influence, but over time, it can be one of the most effective. Denmark attracts international students from many regions, not only because of academic quality, but because of structure, openness, and the experience of studying within a stable social system. For many students, education in Denmark is defined by collaboration rather than competition. Access to instructors, informal dialogue, shared responsibility for learning. These experiences leave lasting impressions. Students build networks. They become familiar with institutions. They develop trust in systems that function predictably. Education functions as long-term diplomacy, not through instruction, but through exposure. Students carry these experiences forward into future careers, into international organizations, into decision-making roles. This form of influence is slow. It produces no immediate outcomes, but over decades, it shapes relationships, and relationships shape cooperation. Closing reflection. Quiet influence. Denmark does not control global outcomes. It operates within limits. Influence depends on context, on timing, on cooperation. There are areas where size matters, where resources define capability, where decisions are shaped by forces far beyond national control. But within those limits, Denmark's role makes sense, not as a power that commands, but as a system that connects. Influence does not always arrive through decisive moments. Sometimes it accumulates quietly, through consistency, through trust, through the decision to remain predictable in an unpredictable world. This is why Denmark often appears where coordination is required, why it is trusted with process rather than command. In global systems, not all influence is visible. Some of it operates in the background, maintaining alignment, reducing friction, keeping systems functional. That kind of influence is easy to overlook, but difficult to replace. If you're still awake, thank you for listening. And if you've drifted off, that's exactly what this was meant for. New episodes are added quietly, without notifications or noise. Wherever you are, and whatever time it is, I hope this helped the world feel a little calmer. Good night.